On Sunday, aboard Air Force One, President Donald Trump announced that he will be talking to Vladimir Putin tomorrow on trying to solve the Russia-Ukraine war. He's going to be talking about nuclear power plants, some kind of trade-offs, moving closer and closer to getting this war solved. All these things are going to be on the table here, and he has optimism, he says, for bringing this war to a close. Everything he's been really running on since 2023 when he announced his candidacy all the way through the electoral system after the election, and since he's been elected, has been focused on this moment. And now then he's moving to his second conversation with Putin, and this one seems to have a little bit more urgency to it, a little bit more maybe anticipation, because he's announcing it ahead of time. He's sounding yet at least some notes of cautious optimism. So one is going to wonder, how this is going to play out. There are some problems with this, however, and it's not with the American side and it's not with the Russian side. There are two other sides in this. It's the European side and the Ukrainian side. Everybody doesn't seem to be on the same sheet of music right now. And this is putting the U.S. president in a position where he may have to make some hard calls. And I would question if anybody, especially on the Western side, puts him in a position and thinking that he won't make those hard calls might not go very well if you know Trump at all. So let's kind of see, let's jump into it here and find out a little bit more. And we're going to look at Steve Witkoff, one of Trump's really new stars, really, in his negotiations, has done some really good work, very impressive. It's been a long time since I've talked about somebody in American diplomacy that's actually having some positive results, but Steve Witkoff is one of them. Here he was yesterday on one of the Sunday talk shows talking about what Trump is planning to do with Putin.
The two sides we've narrowed the differences between them, and now we're sitting at the table. I was with the president all day yesterday. I'll be with him today. We're sitting with him discussing how to narrow it even further. I expect that there'll be a call with both presidents this week, and we're also continuing to engage and have a conversation with the Ukrainians. We're advising them on everything we're thinking about.
Okay, so let's try to parse what he's talking about there, because he is still a diplomat. He's a politician, so he's giving you information. Some things he's not saying so direct, others he is. So we're going to have to kind of read the tea leaves on some of this. But one of the first things he said there that was the optimistic part is he said that situations are narrowing between the Russian and the American view. Now, you may recall that toward the end of last week, that Witkoff went to Moscow and personally, physically talked with Putin, apparently for, I believe, 3 to 4 hours, something like that. Not a minor issue. Stayed about less than 24 hours in Russia, but obviously he's quite focused on maximizing his time, then came back to the United States. That was following the agreement that the United States got with Ukraine in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, on, I will say, encouraging the Ukraine side to say they agreed to a full ceasefire of 30-day duration. And then Witkoff went to Moscow to try and see if we can get concurrence on that side of the ledger. After that meeting happened, you may recall in some of the shows we showed last week, Putin says, yeah, I'm conceptually open to it, but there are, at least the translation used, some nuances in our view. And he listed a whole bunch of questions about how is this going to happen? What's going to happen with this? How's the end results going to happen? Some of his other lieutenants, whether it was Sergei Lavrov or some of the other members of the foreign ministry, have also said, look, we haven't, up to this point, we haven't even contemplated a ceasefire. We just wanted to have negotiations, and then we would stop the fighting once we had an agreement. Now Putin seems to be signaling that I may be open to that, but there are going to be some pretty big conditions on his agreement to do that. And I think that's the priority of effort here for Witkoff when he's going in and talking to Putin, to see if they can narrow those terms so that we can get the ceasefire. As you know, Trump is sharply focused not just on ending the war, but on ending the killing. He wants to see the dying of the Ukraine soldiers. He wants to see the dying of the Russian soldiers come to an end. That is his sharp focus. President Trump realizes, and he's mentioned this either directly or indirectly in numerous forums over the last month or so, he recognizes this is an unwinnable war. It has always been an unwinnable war. The war should never have been fought, etc. So now then, he's a lot less concerned on the terms that may come out there, as long as he gets the net result of ending the war, because he realizes, I think correctly so, that if you get the fighting stopped, then you have some genuine possibilities of leading to more stable relations between the West and Russia. And that West includes the European Union, it includes NATO, Ukraine, and the United States, of course. All that becomes much, much more possible, though not guaranteed, if we get a cessation of hostilities and get this war off the table. There's a lot of bad blood, especially between Europe and some specific European countries and Russia, and that goes in both directions. So it's still not going to be easy to get all the tensions resolved, and just ending this war will make things better, but it's not going to make it into a panacea by any stretch. There's still a lot of work that's going to have to be done. A lot of signals being sent by both sides that are anything but peaceful. But we'll get to that when we get a chance. But if we don't get the war off the table, then you don't even get the chance to talk about kind of a peace, and the tensions will continue to rise, and the risk of escalation will remain on the table where it is right now. That's why Trump is so focused on this. One of the other things he mentioned there is that we're kind of bridging the gap with Russia. Well, shortly before this meeting is going to take place, Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister for Germany, gave a warning of sorts to President Trump, implying that hopefully he won't make some kind of an agreement with Putin without Europe that Europe isn't going to want to live with. I'm not sure that her hopes are going to be met. I'm pretty confident that Trump is not going to be listening to the German foreign minister, might not even be aware she said that. And if he was, I doubt he would have a lot of kind things to say, or a lot of optimistic things to say. I think it's pretty clear that where the Ukrainian or where the Europeans are and where Trump is are two very different things. By the way, I'll just kind of throw this out there. We're going to have a show this afternoon on the whole situation where the Europeans are, this whole coalition of the willing, that the reality bites into the EU's coalition of the willing. We'll be talking about that this afternoon in more detail. But the bottom line is, even as of yesterday, the European side is still not lockstep with the Trump side. In fact, I don't think it's very close at all, though we do seem to keep trying to that. And I know that there's been lots of discussions and conversations at the highest levels between the two to really try and bridge that gap too. I think there will be an easier time to bridge the gap between the United States and Europe than there is between the United States and Ukraine. One of the things I noticed in there was that Witkoff said in that clip I just showed that he specifically said we're narrowing the differences with Russia, but when it came to Ukraine, he just said we're talking to them. We're sharing with them our vision. He had no point in that, at least in that soundbite, said, we're narrowing those or we're making good progress. He just said that we're talking to them. As a matter of fact, and let me just show you why. This is the Ukrainian foreign minister yesterday on Ukrainian news. Seems to be saying, hey, we've got some red lines, by the way. He said in the article and in the interview, well, they're not red lines per se, but they're red lines. And he said that these three things are he stressed that the Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty are non-negotiable. He said that Ukraine's right to choose its alliances, and he emphasized that no country should have a veto over Ukraine's NATO and EU aspirations. And number three, he underscored that Ukraine's ability to defend itself must remain unrestricted, meaning that there can be no restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, all three of those things, as we're going to see here in a bit, are running very counter to everything that the Russian side has been saying. And so he's trying to say, and we showed you one of the members of the Ukrainian parliament last week who said that they're absolute red lines. He did use that term. And he said nearly the versions of all three of those things there too. So that shows you that the leaders at the highest level on the Ukraine side are still focused on what they're going to demand in these negotiations. Now, any rational analysis of this situation, and looking at the balance of power, the condition of the armed forces, the two sides on the field of battle, the inputs that go into each side, the capacities that go into each side, obviously off the charts on the Russian side. We've talked about that 100 times. Don't need to go back through it, except that it's self-evidently there is no leverage on the Ukrainian side to demand anything from anyone, whether the Russians or the Americans. Yet, verbally, that's still where they are right now. Now that kind of contrasts with where Trump is. I mentioned he was interviewed on Air Force One yesterday. Here's one of the things he said about maybe I'll have something to announce as early as tomorrow, which is going to be Tuesday.
We're doing pretty well, I think, with Russia. And we'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
So you see that Trump, I think he's setting the stage here that he may come to a conclusion and an agreement with Vladimir Putin that could end the war. But he keeps adding, maybe we will, maybe we won't. So he's not, saying that we're definitely going to come to an agreement here and the war is going to come to an end. He's saying that the U.S. is willing to come to an agreement with Russia. And I think implied, especially with all these comments that are going on, is that the European Union and the Ukrainian side are not locked in. Forget about the Russian side. They're not even locked in with Trump's side. And there's a pretty big gap. I would say a vast gap between what Trump is wanting to do and what the Europeans and Ukraine is wanting to do. One of the key things that the Europeans is wanting, in addition to the three things that the Ukrainian foreign minister put there, is that they want a coalition of the willing, a robust military force to go into Ukraine. I just cannot for the life of me understand what the logic is behind this, unless it's nothing but rhetoric, unless in reality, the European states, they understand that this will never happen. So it's easy to boast about what they'll do when they know they're never going to have to actually follow through, because a lot of this stuff implies, you saw Ursula von der Leyen last week, the president of the European Union, say that they're going to have this new rearm Europe movement where there's going to be $800 billion spent. Well, almost all of that, a vast majority, is not even possibly going to the Ukraine side. They did say some would, but even that would be what was produced in their own countries, and then some of the excess would be going to do there. Otherwise, it's going to increase their own defense spending, et cetera. And that's certainly something that President Trump has advocated for. So he's okay with that part as it goes. But that's each of the member states making their own armed forces greater. But then they're going a little bit further and saying that they want to have this large force in several different places inside Ukraine in the result of any kind of peace agreement that's ultimately reached. That doesn't even make sense. It's irrational to think that the Russian side would ever, under any circumstances, agree to that. They have been emphatic, and they have never deviated from their claim that if the Ukrainian people host the Russian European state army, especially if they have any kind of association with a NATO military force, France, Germany, UK, etc., if they go anywhere on the territory of Ukraine, Russia will consider them a combatant just like anyone else, whether it's a Ukrainian soldier, whether it's a foreign mercenary, etc. They'll consider them all the same. They're enemy combatants and subject to being attacked. And if you're not planning to fight for the Ukraine side against the Russian side, and by the way, they always specify these three cities are two of them are kind of close to the front line. The other one's, I think, back in Lviv is one of the options. What are they there for? If you're not going up to the line of contact to actually help, to be, so-called peace enforcement, then what do you think they're going to do just in garrison there? I mean, surely you've paid attention to the tactical progress of this war here, and you see that anytime you get troops concentrated, they become subject to missile strikes by the Russian side and dying in large numbers, whether they're way off the front line or somewhere near the front line. That happens routinely in this war because Russia has, they both have their intelligence capacity, satellites. Of course, they have partisan and people on the ground in the Ukraine side that's given tactical information. A lot of these strikes have been as a result of human intelligence, etc. Not sure what you think you're going to accomplish by having your troops with a bullseye on them. So I don't even understand what the rationale is, but what you think that's going to accomplish. It's almost as though the arrogance just hasn't died yet, and you think that just the mere presence of French and British and maybe German troops somewhere in Ukraine is going to scare Putin. that he's like, well, he won't take action against us. All we got to do is put our guys there, and then he'll back down, and that will be deterrence, and he won't go any further. Well, listen, I don't know if you guys saw, but over the weekend, Emmanuel Macron from France was talking about his part of this rearm Europe. And he says, by the way, we're not going to like make the draft come back because we can't. We don't have the capacity to do that. We can't even raise the number of troops that we have. They're going to try and recruit more, but they can't compel more to come in because they don't have the facilities. They don't have the capacity to house them, to clothe them, to give them ammunition and weapons, etc. What do you think that message is going to do in Moscow? Do you think they're going to go, you can't even get an army in peacetime? You don't even have the capacity. Not forget the will. You don't have the capacity. The French people don't have the will. They are not going to join up in any kind of large number. So there's no fear of that. But what you just signaled to the Russian side is that if we got into a war with you, we couldn't sustain it. Now, if you think the presence of some French uniforms in a certain city inside Ukraine is going to scare Russia, you're actually inviting them to attack because you're exposing your weakness and your incapacity. That's not helping your side. But that's the state of play in the European Union today, whether in NATO or individual European states like France. You're openly signaling your weakness here. Keir Starmer puts a tougher spin on it, and in terms of his words, and it's like telling Putin that I think he also this past weekend said that this 30-day, your conditions that you're putting on this 30-day ceasefire, that's not good enough. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure that Putin's quaking in his boots on that one too. All you're doing is showing your weakness, and it is being received. That message is being received, and far from encouraging deterrence, you're actually encouraging people on the war hawk side of Russia, and they have a whole brand of that too, encourages them to say, hey, maybe we need to test these guys. Even if they don't, be foolish enough to give them inside of the Ukraine side, making them easy targets, maybe we need to take them on. There is an element in the Russia that says, hey, they're weak now. Let's take care of our security once and for all. Don't rely on anybody's trust, no guarantees, no pieces of paper, nothing. Let's just take them out militarily. Now, that would be catastrophic, and I certainly hope Russia to do that. I think that would be a terrible mistake, because the chances that the European Union or even the United States, if they fear that they'll be conventionally defeated, then the trump card they have is their nuclear weapons. France and the UK have nuclear weapons, and I doubt there's any chance that they would allow their armies to be defeated in a conventional battle and not resort to nuclear weapons. So we need to make sure that never happens, and hopefully Putin will not be foolish enough to listen to his warhawk guys to move in there, because it just wouldn't go very well if it depended on how big the thing ended up getting. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's right now, those are just theoreticals. But on the ground, Trump is very focused on getting this done. So one of the other things that he's talking about, you may have heard some of this mentioned already, is maybe he's going to try and get both sides to agree to give up something to, and he mentioned in this case here one particular category I want to discuss.
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants, because that's up, that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
Okay, so there's going to be, I think, a bit more of a challenge here for the Trump negotiating team, because he's talking about dividing up assets. It almost sounds like you're going to divorce court. And he mentioned power plant specifically in there. I want to run to the map here so you can see what they're talking about here. One of the issues they're talking about is this in Zaporizhia, this power plant. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, it's right over here. That's called the Enogdar. This is a nuclear power plant that really came into the forefront of the war early. Several times the Ukrainian side tried to recapture this. This is on the other side of the Dnieper River. which the river itself was significantly less lowered when there was a dam was broken shortly after the beginning of the war, which made it possible for Ukraine to try and have a bunch of speedboats. They had a bunch of attempts to cross over this water. Russians have been defending it ever since. It's a nuclear power plant that obviously is not connected to the energy grid for the rest of Ukraine. They want this one back. So they're thinking, how's about we negotiate some kind of trade so that the Ukraine side has access to the energy produced here, because Russia has been systematically destroying the energy capabilities throughout Ukraine really for the past 2 years. They want that back to try and help with their energy problem and their electricity problem to the rest. Now, it's just hard for me to understand where where the leverage is for the Russian side to give up so big of a prize that they have held on to and defended and robust several times here. Obviously, we had the issue with Kursk, and up until maybe 2 weeks ago, the Ukraine side kept saying, "Hey, we'll trade you the Kursk area. We'll give that back to you in exchange for Enogdar." Well, obviously, Russia has taken care of that, because now there's basically just a couple of fields left that the Ukraine side hasn't been driven out yet. That could come as soon as 24 to 36 hours from now. But because there's no more, I don't think there's any more even settlements in that area. It's now just basically strips of patches of territory, of fields and forests that mainly the Ukraine side's trying to get the last of their guys out. So there's nothing to trade for that anymore, certainly nothing big. And by the way, you still have the Russian side still has troops in the Kharkiv area. They have troops now in the Sumy area in the north. Both of those, according to what Putin said just a few days ago, when you may recall when he was wearing his camouflage uniform, he said, "Hey," to his commander, "how's about we have a buffer zone here so they can no longer fire a bunch of missiles and drones into our country, certainly not into Moscow." So my expectation is that Russia is going to do that, and they're going to continue to press forward into the Sumy Oblast. And it's unclear how far that's going to go. They may even go to the Chernihiv Oblast that's to the west of Sumy, because that's kind of one that juts a little bit further into the territory of Russia. They may push back in there as well. So all I see so far are chips in the Russian side, and I don't see any chips in the Ukrainian side that they have to handle. I think it's not very likely, though I guess it's always possible that President Trump's team can get, maybe as a sign of good faith from the Russian side, to give something they don't have to in exchange maybe for sanctions relief or some kind of other gives beyond this war that Russia wants in terms of better relations and more security. I don't know for sure what those even could be. Maybe there's potentially things that we don't know about in the negotiations that are being discussed, because what we see on the ground, there's really not a lot of evidence that Ukraine has anything of value to give for Russia to give something of value like Enogdar. But we'll see how it's going to work out. Trump continues to say in that previous clip, you heard him say, "Well, I'm optimistic. I think maybe we can get a deal, but maybe not." He keeps using that because I think he's saying we're willing to walk if this doesn't work out right. And going back to Witkoff, there's some more evidence here. He's going to be talking here that they're talking to both sides, but there's also a caveat here.
We're going to have teams, United States negotiators, meeting with Ukrainians this week, in discussions with them this week. Same thing will happen with the Russians. And I think, as the president said, he really expects there to be some sort of deal in the coming weeks, maybe. And I believe that that's the case. I actually believe that that's the sort of progress that we saw in my conversation with President Putin.
And he didn't say anything else there about, who others' conversation. I believe him. I believe that when he's talking to Putin, there's no doubt in my mind that Trump and Putin want this war to be over with, and they're willing to do whatever it takes. But despite all these ridiculous claims by so many in Western Europe that Putin, he was just wanting to take over and conquer all of Ukraine so that he can keep rolling into the rest of Europe. That's never been true. And in fact, I've been arguing really for the majority of the first 3 years of this war that they didn't even have the capacity to do so. The problem now is because the West would never take the off-ramps before, they're now put Russia into a position to where, okay, we need to build the capacity to go further, because if they can't get a deal that they can live with, they may take matters into their own hands, and that could mean going into some parts of NATO. Even I think that would be a terrible idea, because I continue to say never underestimate the actions of scared people who have some nuclear power in their hands. Don't put them in a position to where they're afraid of losing conventionally when they have a trigger for nuclear weapons. So I really hope that doesn't happen. I hope that Europe wises up and realizes that is a losing proposition. Just get this war off the table so that we can get back to some semblance of normality and lower, if not remove, the chance of any kind of clash between the West and the East. That everyone will lose if that happens, to include the Russians, to include the Europeans. Everybody will lose if we go down that path. So I hope that President Trump puts as much pressure on the European Union to just acknowledge reality. And by the way, I just want to point this out too. Also, on our video tab right now on our YouTube page, I posted a video of a radio show I did last night in London, where it's one of the most concise, just almost lightning round shots, where the LBC radio host kept hitting me with all of these comments that come from the European side that they claim is true. Their leaders have been telling the people these things so long. And as Ian Puttick has told me several times from watching it on the inside, he said it's almost like propaganda, just making the mentality that people believe the stuff over and over. You can go watch that video there, because you'll see, I think it's about 20 minutes in duration, something like that, to where you just see all of the main points that the Europeans actually believe. And apparently Trump is trying to bring them back, instead of believing the fiction that all of those claims are based on, back to reality. Europe will benefit from having this war over. Security-wise, economically, every way you want to count, Europe will benefit if this comes across. And if any kind of reason at all that Russia has had for having confrontation is taken off the table. And we're going to see some of that in our show at 2:30 this afternoon too. We're going to go into more detail on the European side on that as well. But for right now, we want to look at the problem that not even Europe so much is with Ukraine. So I've showed you some of what the Europeans have said, but then here, talking about the gulf between where the two sides are, is Zelensky. This is what he said yesterday about what he's looking for in an end-of-term negotiation.
I can't be for sure that 30 days are enough for that. I think that from our side, it will be enough. But when we have three parties, three sides, and we'll do everything to have not three but four sides, to be Europe to be included as well, and I would like us to be supported by the partners. It's important for us, because let's be honest, who will fund the support of Ukraine? Who will help in funding of our army? And where will Ukraine be in the security guarantees and its economic component of this guarantees? That depends on European Union. The help is Europe. I mean, financial support of the army. But we rely upon, first and foremost, upon Europe and America. That's what I think. And then maybe not 30 days, maybe a bit longer will be needed.
Okay, there's no problem with the 30 days is just a framework to start with. The terms already said, and it can be extended by mutual agreement by the parties. So there's no problem with whether it takes 30 days or 90 days or 100 days, whatever. That's irrelevant. What matters a lot, though, is to even get to day one, is you have to have an agreement on the conditions where this is going. Now, you just heard him in that short little soundbite there, mirroring what was said by his foreign minister, mirroring what was said by his member of parliament last week, that he's looking for security guarantees and he's looking for a robust army. Those are in direct contradiction. Back in December, one of the Russian members of their, I think it's the Security Council, the Russian Federation Council speaker, said that, hey, listen, Russia is open to compromise in its negotiations, but that Russia will not deviate from the terms of the March 2022 Istanbul agreements by one iota, she said. The conditions put forward during the negotiations in Istanbul indicated that, one, Ukraine would be a permanent neutral state that could not join NATO, and imposed limitations on the Ukrainian military similar to those imposed on the Treaty of Versailles on Germany after World War I, restricting Ukraine's armed forces to 85,000. That is a 90% reduction in what they have right now. But you see that the vast gulf between what Russia says is their minimum conditions and what Ukraine and Europe says is their condition. So you saw Zelensky there saying he wants a four-party negotiation. Well, how are you going to get a negotiations if you have two parties over here and you have two parties way over here? There's a huge and so far not bridgeable gulf between where these sides are. And anytime you have negotiations on almost anything and you have the sides this far apart, it's going to come down to who has the ability to compel compliance on the other side. Who is the powerful negotiating position here? Who has the cards, as Trump has used several times? And it doesn't take much analysis to know that it's the Russian side that has the cards. I'll repeat here something I have been saying emphatically for so long. Russia does not need a negotiated settlement. They can continue fighting the war until they win. There's been a lot of reports from the Ukrainian, from Zelensky himself, from some of the Russian side, some Telegram channels, that there is reportedly large formations of Russian forces in the north and in the east that could go on an offensive, a big scale offensive, as early as the 1st of next month. I mean, it could literally be weeks away. That's when the rainy season is, the spring rainy season is mostly over, and they get to some good weather. And historically, that's when a lot of the actions have taken place, because especially mechanized forces need to be able to get off the roads. And if it's a rainy season, they can get bogged down, and then they're easy prey for drones. So they don't want that, and so they may wait for that. Now, let me point something out. There's a belief on many in the Western side that because Russia has taken 3 years to get this roughly 20-something% of Ukraine, that's all they can do. And especially what they've done over the last, about 18 months or so of this nonstop offensive, is that it's relatively minimal, especially when you look at it in terms of the entire country. And they say it's taken that long, 3 years to get 20%, then, it could take another 2 years to get, another 20%. And so, the idea then we'll just drag it out. So then eventually Russia's offensive capacity will play itself out and they'll stop. That implies that Russia has only taken this much territory because that's all they can take. But one thing you need to understand, just looking at this from the outside and observing what has happened for now we're in the 4th year of this war, other than the opening salvo, Russia never had what I call a big arrow offensive, where they went with large numbers of forces across multiple axes of advance and put lots of pressure on the Ukraine side. That's what they did. That's how they got the 20% they have. And actually, of course, in the north, they had a whole lot more in the beginning, before they ended up withdrawing under pressure later on, because they didn't have enough troops to hold what they had. They do now. And since that time, there's only been one place where they really applied a lot of force in a short period of time and had, really rapid gains, and that's in Kursk. Now, we've been showing you this from August of last year. Russia had been methodically pulverizing it and moving it down, hitting around the edges and taking, settlement here, a field there, etc. And they got it down pretty much. But then came the movement on the 8th of March to where it appeared Russia made a conscious decision and then collapsed virtually the whole thing. Many square, I think over 100 square kilometers in a matter of days, to now to where it's essentially already over. There's just some mopping up on the last couple of fields in the southern part of that. Then they're probably going to continue going on into the Sumy or Chernihiv Oblast beneath that. That could be a symbol of what Russia could do when they decide to mass combat power. Now, you take that 2,000 kilometer front that Putin talked about there, and especially I believe the 1,000 or so kilometers of it specifically on the eastern front, and you have a situation to where the Ukrainian army is very, very brittle. The morale is in the toilet. There's a piece in El Pai Spanish magazine today or this weekend, I'm sorry, where they interviewed, I think it was 36 Ukrainian soldiers from various points on there. And they said the morale is just absolutely rock bottom. Their training is insufficient. They don't get enough, even untrained personnel. Their mobilization system can't get it. The guys continue to try and flee every time that the Ukrainian tries to force mobilization. They're trying to force mobilize 30,000 people per month to try and at least offset the losses. That are not succeeding. And those that they get, most of them abandon, they run away before they ever get to the battlefield. So even if they get close to 30, it's not enough to offset losses. And that number is further reduced that actually show up. So the net is a significant loss in the size of the Ukrainian armed forces every month. That's with the slow and methodical move. If Russia chooses to have a big arrow somewhere and really presses one of the weaker spots on the front line, wherever they may assess, then I would go so far as to say it is probable, it's certainly possible, but it's probable they will break through somewhere, because the Ukraine side just doesn't have enough men or ammunition to stop that. And Russia could say, we'll suffer some higher rates of casualties in this area, but once they break through, I mean, one of the big reasons tactically why the Kursk area fell apart so fast is because Russia showed up somewhere that they weren't supposed to. They got in this oil gas pipeline, and they went 16 kilometers, and then reportedly 800 of them came up in the rear of the Ukrainian side, and it just caused a collapse of the entire formation, everything north of that, and they were just abandoning positions left and right. If the Russians were continuing that slow and methodical press from the outside, they were prepared. But as soon as they got behind them and there was panic set in, the same kind of thing categorically could happen here. If Russia breaks through in some of these places, then there could be panic set in around, and the entire section of the front could literally collapse. And then once that happens, then like the opening salvo in February 2022, Russia can literally drive into the interior of Ukraine. Then they don't even have to fight their way in, and it could be game over at that point. I don't know for sure that's going to happen. Unfortunately, all I know is what press reports are saying and what I can observe here. I don't have access to any classified information, and certainly the Russian army isn't telling people what their capacities are. But I know militarily, it seems likely that they would be building this capacity because they have the wherewithal to do so. I think that the Trump team is aware of those kinds of things, and I think that that's why they're trying to, I won't even say encourage. I'm guessing that behind the scenes, they're compelling Ukraine. You're either going to deal with this and you're going to react this way, or you're on your own. Trump has indicated this a couple of times already of saying, hey, I'm willing to walk. I mean, he's done it before. He's done it plenty of times before. If something's not working out the way he wants and he sees it's a losing proposition, he'll cut that off like a businessman that he is, and he'll say, we're not going to reinforce failure. We're going to shut this off. And he has said a couple of times that he would do that specifically in this case. He said again there in that clip I showed you from Air Force One yesterday that maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. And if anybody on the Ukraine side is uncertain about what that means, I think you're going down a bad path, because you're not listening to what he's saying. You're not looking at what he's done in the past, because I don't think that there's going to be much of an option here if Trump doesn't get his way. In these conversations that he's having with Putin, I'm thinking that they're probably going to come to some kind of an agreement and said, all right, we're willing to do this. You're willing to do that. These are the terms. And I'm guessing because Putin's in the position of strength, he'll tell Trump, if you're willing to do this, if you can get the Ukraine side to do this, and it's going to be something along the lines of what I just showed you from the Federation Council chairwoman, if it's not something along those lines, he'll just keep fighting. But I'm guessing, I think there's a good chance that Putin and Trump will come to an agreement that he says, all right, if you can get the Ukraine side to do the things that the Federation Council chairwoman said, then we'll have a ceasefire and we'll talk it out. And if he can't, then I think Trump will say, you guys are on your own. Figure it out with Europe. You have this coalition of the willing. Y'all want to keep going on. You want to reinforce failure. You're on your own. I have given you an off-ramp, and I'm not Joe Biden. I will take the off-ramp. And if you don't take it, because this is the best deal you're going to get, that's key. That's key. As I discovered in this LBC radio yesterday, the Western European view, because they've been inculcated with this from the beginning, is that if Trump, quote, hands Putin everything he wants, they'll call that, you're just giving in and giving away and giving up. A surrender monkey, some call it. And I'm telling you, from a military perspective, taking the emotion out of it, from a military perspective, if Trump comes up with a deal with Ukraine, with Putin, that's along the lines of what that Federation Councilwoman said, that is the best deal you're ever going to get. You had a chance in Istanbul in 2022. You forfeited it. You gave away the chance to actually have a good outcome. You could have had it in 2023. You could have had it in 2024. Every time you wait, the terms got worse. Believe it or not, the terms can still be worse than what Trump and Putin may come up with now. Because if Ukraine doesn't agree to this, if Europe doesn't agree to this, then Putin will say, I appreciate, Mr. President, appreciate your efforts here at peace. Would have loved to seen it happen, but we're not from a position of strength going to give something away to the side that perpetuated this war all those times that Russia wanted the off-ramp. And now then they're just going to keep rolling until the Dnieper River. They will probably take Odessa. They will probably take Kharkiv, and they will push right up to the gates of Kiev. And it's anybody's guess what would happen after that. And the thing is, Russia has the capacity to do that. They definitely have the will. And this is probably something that wouldn't happen quick unless there is a literal collapse of the Ukraine army. If they continued fighting, then it's very possible that this could drag on many, many more months. My personal guess is that where things are right now, if Trump walks the psychological harm and the limitations for the European Union to actually provide enough ammunition and weapons and the moral loss on the Ukraine side, I think you would see something similar to what we did in the last stage of the Afghan war. After 20 years of staying forward, once the United States said we're now withdrawing and pulled our support, then the whole thing morally collapsed after that. I think that there would be a real chance that would happen. But even if it didn't, even if it took another full year of fighting, into the early part of 2026, Russia can win. They don't have to negotiate. If you care anything about the people of Ukraine, and Donald Trump does, then you will accept whatever he and Putin come up with. And for the sake of all the men who are alive right now, how many times have I said this? The people who are alive right now, if they had reached a negotiated settlement before, would be alive. There are now thousands of people, thousands of men who have pointlessly sacrificed their lives because the president of Ukraine was unwilling to acknowledge reality, because the European leaders were unwilling to acknowledge reality. They're dead now. They didn't have to be, but they are. Those who are alive now, today, as I'm saying it, are their entire future, their family's future. The future of Ukraine is on the line. Don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Don't condemn thousands more of your people to an unnecessary and pointless death that provides no value for your country now or in the future. Don't condemn them to death by ignoring reality one last time. This may be your last chance to end the war and save what's left of your country. I think that's where we are. Before we shut this episode down here, I do want to touch on something else that's been happening over the weekend. There was also some U.S. airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. And I wanted to just touch real briefly on that and kind of show you where that's at and where that may be heading. Yesterday on the Sunday news shows in the United States, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth went on to address it.
An era of peace through strength is back. Just like in his first term, President Trump had to deal with the weakness of President Obama and get rid of ISIS, and he did it more quickly than anybody else. We're sitting on 4 years of deferred maintenance from Joe Biden, where in particular, when you talk about the Houthis, they were allowed for over 100 times to shoot at commercial shipping. 4 months ago, when we sent a ship through, it was shot at 17 times. Ships haven't been able to go through for over a year without being shot at. Freedom of navigation is basic. It's a core national interest. And President Trump has said, we will restore that and we will be unrelenting. I want to be very clear. This campaign is about freedom of navigation and restoring deterrence. The minute the Houthis say, we'll stop shooting at your ships, we'll stop shooting at your drones, this campaign will end. But until then, it will be unrelenting. We got the reports last night. The Houthi capital felt like an earthquake. Dozens and dozens of precision heavy munitions dropping precisely on the targets that we wanted to hit, sending a very clear message. And the message is clear to Iran as well, and the president said it in his truth. Your support of the Houthis needs to end immediately. We will hold you accountable as the sponsor of this proxy, and I echo his statement. We will not be nice about it. We will come after the Houthis until they stop shooting at our ships, and the Iranians better stay out of it.
Okay, this is a difficult situation. We need to be sober-minded about this. The Houthis are not going to be cowed by a bunch of missiles, even heavy barrage like he's talking about, even if it's consistent. And look, the Saudis tried it for a decade, going all the way back to 2015. They tried to, even with our help, they just almost relentlessly bombed them, caused all kinds of casualties and blew up all kinds of stuff since October the 7th of 2023, when the war with Hamas broke out, and then all the ones that spawned after that. The Houthis, in solidarity with the Palestinian people, started trying to shut down Israeli shipping in the Red Sea. And the Israelis attacked Houthis. The U.S. under Joe Biden attacked the Houthis many, many times. We sent the aircraft carrier flotilla groups there to try to keep that thing open. It never succeeded. The attacks continued on, and there was you may recall, I think it was in 2024. There was one time where a couple of Houthi cruise missiles came dangerously close to hitting one of the U.S. warships, and they finally knocked down that missile before it actually struck. We got lucky then, quite frankly. In response to this strike here, the Houthis launched apparently 12 drones at the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier, and we knocked all those drones down as well. But you're playing with fire if you think that our air defenses will always be perfect and always get through. My concern is because the Secretary of Defense there specifically mentioned the connection with Iran, and they're supplying them with a lot of the weapons they get. They don't supply them with all of them, by the way. We're definitely have been aware. It's been revealed now that there is a domestic arms industry that the Houthis get help from Iran, but it's not a teacher-client kind of situation where they're just told what to do by Tehran, and they don't rely exclusively on Tehran. They have their own capacity to create pretty modern missiles. If some of those ends up getting through there, you can see where we're going to be put in a really tough bind. Let's say that one of those missiles got through, or one of those drones got through, or next time it's a missile that hits an American warship and causes casualties. The pressure on President Trump then to immediately assume that it was Iran and strike Iran would be through the roof. And now suddenly we could be in a war that we don't want and don't need. So this is a very, very dangerous time. The Houthis were, you saw Secretary Hegseth there said that if the Houthis stop interdicting the traffic in the Red Sea, we'll stop attacking them. Well, for their side, the Houthis said if the Israeli side will go back to abiding by the truce that was signed and allow food get into the Palestinians, they would stop attacking any ships in the Red Sea. So this is a mutual effort here, and everybody's got a role to play. And the most important thing is to make sure this does not expand any further. We don't need to be adding another war onto our situation here, especially one that cannot benefit us any. We do not need to fight this war. It would be counterproductive for our interest. And just if anybody's under any illusions that missiles and long-range strikes can decapitate Iran and suddenly make them amenable to something of our interest, don't have that misunderstanding, because it won't happen that way. It will just stir up the hornet's nest, and then they will now, and depending on how hard it goes, then they have a whole lot more missiles, and they have something to do. This is not like Syria. This is not like Iraq or Iran. I'm sorry, Iraq or like Libya, those kinds of things where those states couldn't do anything, and you could nearly hit them with impunity with missiles. Iran has the ability to do something and hit back. So let's be a little sober-minded about this and don't go down a path that can't end well for our side. We'll continue to monitor this as we always do, and we'll be reporting to you whatever is happening there. Be sure and join us at 2:30 this afternoon. Reality Bites, the EU's coalition of the willing. There's some fault lines even within the European Union itself, which are already starting to manifest. We'll see you at 2:30 this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.